And this is your host of Discussions of Truth, Ian Hamilton Trottier. Welcome to your Wednesday edition, as always. Trying to get Periscope up and running for you. I think at Ian Trottier, you'll find me on Periscope. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Instagram. And that's IanTroTtier. And if you type that into Google, you're going to find my website as well. And on my website, speaking of the website, let me direct you to a couple different websites, because we have impeachmassmedia.com as one campaign. And we also have stopmassmedia.com. If you donate $50 to that campaign, you get a high-quality cotton T-shirt. Very comfortable. The one I'm wearing right now, you can see it on Periscope. Impeach Mass Media. Be awesome. What is that? What do you mean by be awesome, Ian? What do you mean take authority to task? You are the authority. Isn't that the beauty behind the U.S. Constitution and the design of the United States of America? We do this in the name of people like Martin Luther King and various theories as to why JFK. Last week, Mark Shaw, former defense attorney based in L.A., he has been a legal analyst and commentator on various stations, CNN, ESPN, MSNBC, I believe. And he started looking into the death of Dorothy Kilgallen. A little bit after writing that book, The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, the Dorothy Kilgallen story, he signed a contract with the Dowdle brothers to get the book made into a movie. He joined the program for the third time last week. Denial of Justice is the sequel to The Reporter Who Knew Too Much. He says he knows exactly who killed Dorothy Kilgallen. The official autopsy is overdose on barbiturates. He says that's completely false, and he's willing to take the Attorney General to task, if you will, for the state of New York in that office. Okay, so impeachmassmedia.com, iantrottier.com. On iantrottier.com, you'll find, as you go to the landing page, you find Stephen Kinzer listed, John Perkins listed, Nomi Prinz listed, Chris McDaniel. Who are these people? If you haven't heard of them, you should know who they are. Stephen Kinzer was a correspondent for years with the New York Times. He's now a member of the Watson Institute, Brown University. John Perkins. Who is John Perkins? If you don't know who John Perkins is, familiarize yourself with the term known as economic hitman. What is an economic hitman? He was basically hired by the CIA to go into foreign countries, i.e. Panama, and take out the head of state. That would be the person that would be in opposition, if you will, a hurdle to U.S. negotiations. And what's the main objective here? Control of natural resources. Economic hitman. Okay, that's an excellent episode. You can find all the past episodes. This is now episode 105. Been doing this now for 2 years. You can find all past episodes on iantrottier.com or on mixcloud.com by entering search inquiry my name, IanTroTtier, or finding them on iTunes. Now, not all the episodes are listed on iTunes, but I believe they're at 60 plus. And the John Perkins episode definitely is on iTunes. Nomi Prinz, former Goldman Sachs, very successful banker for Goldman Sachs, speaking out against the global economic system, collusion. And Chris McDaniel, Mississippi state senator who found deep corruption in the South. That would be the state of Mississippi. Those are 4 people that have joined this program. And they're listed on my website as you go to the landing page. The online radio station, iHeartRadio, has now picked up Discussions of Truth. So you can now find Discussions of Truth, the weekly program, shooting right out here from Miami, Wynwood Radio, the Wynwood district of Miami, and that is now going into iHeartRadio. Okay? That was just picked up since the last episode. All right, so now, getting into next week. See, next week is going to be a very interesting episode. Do yourself a favor if any of what I'm doing resonates with you. Google my name, Google Zika, Zika, and Google Miami Beach, and that'll take you to a honey colony archive, where honeycolony.com. And Miriam's objective is to, and she's based in Hollywood, is to save the honeybees. Honeybees are an incredibly important element of agriculture in many aspects of our life. But there you will find an article that was written and submitted and published by Honey Colony, and it basically gets into exactly why I do what I do. And that is to seek out corruption and destroy it. And that's why I open with Metallica. The song off of the album, Kill 'Em All, is to seek out corruption and destroy it. Impeach Mass Media, when you go to impeachmassmedia.com, you're met with a graph. A graph that shows you just how corrupt the American media empire is, because it's not entirely American, and that will be the argument is how American is it? Even recently, as in the past 24 hours, somebody asks you, "What's the most amazing book that you've read, Ian, in the past year?" Well, I've read a lot. I've had guests on this program, and I've read their books. But I have to go back to the Anthony Sutton, one of Anthony Sutton's publications, and that leads me to when you go to my website, you tap on articles. And yeah, you can find that Zika Miami Beach article. And this is all coming around full circle, so hang tight. But there you're going to find under articles links to interest you. Links to interest you. Publications, PDFs, free. Yeah, you probably have no idea even existed. Information about the country you live in or about the world that you live in. America's secret establishment. That's the first link there for you. It's a free link. It's a free publication. Federal Reserve Conspiracy. Those are 2 publications by Anthony Sutton. Weather as a Force Multiplier. Owning the weather in 2025. Owning the weather. Oh, you think geoengineering or man-created hurricanes? You think this is just conspiracy theory? That's a United States Air Force publication. It's available to the public. Google, owning the weather in 2025. That would be 6 years from now. Climate change and the 75% problem. Radio frequency, radiation. Dosimetry handbook. Social media and strategic communication. Story of the Committee of 300, Dr. John Coltman. Secrets of the Federal Reserve, Eustace Mullins. Athenian Oration, The Crown, by Demosthenes. 322. Yes, that's Lodge 322. You might be thinking Skull and Bones, Yale University. Limits to Growth. A report of the Club of Rome. The Club of Rome. Have you heard of the Club of Rome? Why should you have heard of the Club of Rome? Why should they be interested in you? GovernmentAddict.org. Federal government documents obtained via Freedom of Information Act. These are all free of charge. There's no charge for any of these links. The Correspondence Theory of Truth via Stanford University. Plato. Free yourself from Microsoft and the NSA. Other links to interest you: how Ben Franklin organized the U.S. economic independence, Hoover's FBI and Anglo-American dictatorship, Anton Chaikin, John Locke's political philosophy, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Okay, now getting to, these are just various links to interest you about the global machine. Because to make no mistake about it, we are all serving a major global machine. So the question is, who's running and who's controlling that machine? Who's pulling the strings of the puppet? Which you can hear me say. What was it? Miami NBC News. You can hear me say. There's a link right on that archive, referring to the then mayor of Miami Beach as a puppet to the then Governor Rick Scott of the state of Florida. Absolutely. Make no doubt about it. No, there's no question. So getting back to most recently, Ian, what was the most impressive book you read? And I directed that person to The Best Enemy Money Can Buy. The best enemy money can buy? What are you talking about? Buying an enemy? Yes, controlling both sides of an equation. Controlling both sides of an equation to dominate the nature of the outcome. Hegelian dialectic. Yes, exactly. The best enemy money can buy. Funding both sides of the Vietnam War? What do you mean, Ian? What do you mean U.S. bankers were funding both sides of World War II? Oh, Prescott Bush? Yes, this is all fact. This is all true. So the United States sitting at $23 trillion in debt? Who are they in debt to? One would make you think that, yes, they owe money to China. Yes, they may owe money to Russia. Well, I think it goes a little bit deeper than that, and especially when you familiarize yourself with the work of Anthony Sutton, former Stanford Hoover Fellow, you realize, no, these are not just simple hedges of people trying to make money. This is a global monopoly, a la Rockefeller. Remember, he was his books or his company Standard Oil was tried for being a monopoly. Yeah, well, he's not the only one. That's my guess. Okay, so why do I do what I do? I have 2 years here on Wynwood Radio. Why do I do this? Self-produced, self-funded, self-researched. Okay, yeah, I've had a few people join me here to add where they want, where they can. But this is me doing this for you. Yes. So that you can understand where I'm coming from. As a Californian living in Florida and being exposed to something called the Zika virus. The Zika virus. Well, yeah, you may vaguely remember that in Brazil, Recife, babies being born with deformed heads, microcephaly. But they're being exposed to pesticides like Naled. So as I began to research, which took me to an ingredient called tetraethyl, which was a Standard Oil rooted product, basically, that the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, could only run on. So when German planes were flying over and bombing London, they were doing so being fueled off of basically a Standard Oil Rockefeller product. Because they could only operate off of gas or petroleum that contained tetraethyl. That was it. That was by design. That was, I think it was General Motors. By design. By design. No, they couldn't use any other gas. Right. So basically, America was bombing London via the Germans. Sounds weird, right? No, not just a simple hedge. Not just a simple hedge is my argument. Okay, so some of these things get complex, but tying two knots together, you find the Zika virus being discovered in the Uganda forest, right, of Africa, and the science and scientists, just like the University of Chicago, being funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. Yet on the flip side, okay, this is where it gets to the Hegelian dialectic, right? Controlling both sides of the outcome. Now, whether this is coincidence, I don't think so, or whether it was by design, which I'm slightly more inclined to think after having people like Charlotte Iserbit on the program, and the list is quite impressive. You realize that, okay, yes, maybe it is by design, yes, the deliberate dumbing down of America, and you find that the pesticide Naled was also a Rockefeller product. because it was designed by the Chevron Chemical Corporation in the 1950s. Just throwing it out there, and I wrote the article on it. So if you type in my name and you type in Zika, it's Ian Trottier, Zika at Miami Beach, you'll find that article on Honey Colony. You can find it on my website as well. But go to my website, find the articles, click on those links. They're free PDFs. I urge you to go to The Best Enemy Money Can Buy by Anthony Sutton, former Stanford Hoover fellow. So that's that. And that leads me to pick off from where I left off with Richard Lighthouse. Next week, Richard Lighthouse, an American author and researcher. Lighthouse holds a Master's of Science degree from Stanford University in mechanical engineering. Previously worked for NASA. He regularly submits self-publications via Smashwords, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon. That is next week. Let me just read this quote to you. Because it gets into, he writes about a number of issues. But one that is of interest is the following. And I've read this 2 weeks in a row now. So this is the third week, I believe. Lloyd's Banking Group, you may have heard of it, is probably the largest corporation, this is quote, corporation in the world, with a global market capitalization exceeding 2.4 quadrillion USD. This is according to Yahoo Finance. According to Richard Lighthouse, next week's guest. This company was formed in 1995, but based on its financial, appears to be hiding trillions of dollars in assets. The total market capitalization of these stocks listed on the London Stock Exchange, I've listed them there, are quite large. The first one is capital LLD, all capitals too. Okay, so number 4 that he lists. In fact, he continues to say, it is larger than all other banks in the world combined. Lloyd's Banking Group of London, he says, is the largest banking group in the world. Okay? Larger than all other banks combined. You just said it. So, think about that because it bears repeating. One bank in London has more assets and value than all other banks in the world combined. It is at least 100 times larger than the next largest bank, JP Morgan Chase. Why is this important? And why would you care? Because as a citizen of the United States, you're in a $23 trillion debt. Your government is. So who are you in debt to? And if a bank based in London is larger than all other banks combined, wouldn't that interest you? And who are the people that own that bank? Because it all kind of trickles down to the air that you breathe. And when you have there's nothing you can do about a plane flying over your head and spraying you with a pesticide that is deemed illegal by the European Union. Okay, yes, Naled was deemed a neurotoxin and completely illegal in Europe. Studies out of Oslo. Yet, Miami-Dade County and the state of Florida and the CDC out of Atlanta, a federal agency, permitted it to be sprayed over the inhabitants of Miami. It also got sprayed in San Diego. So when something like that happens to you, then you're kind of like, oh, there's an invasion of my airspace. Take a big, deep breath in. And who knows? If you are prone to perhaps developing something like Alzheimer's in 20 years, the likelihood is that you have it more. Okay, fine. There's lots of toxins that we are exposed to on a daily basis. You play golf, you get exposed to toxins, all right? But as a county, couldn't they have chosen to spray something organic, something that was safe, something that wasn't a neurotoxin? I think so, right? And then when you read the research that I did on that pesticide, you realize that I kind of stopped everything I was doing, and I started doing this. March 6th, trained by the BBC, Tony Gosling will be joining us. And starting off the month of April, we will be joined by Dennis Bushnell, NASA Langley Research Center. He's the chief scientist there. He'll be talking about climate change. So today's program, and I've eaten up 20 minutes of the show, spouting off about why I do what I do. Hopefully it's of interest to you. It should be. One of Britain's most prolific alternative lecturers, AndyThomas, Internationally renowned for his research on Western world history and unsolved mysteries. We'll be joining the program in a matter of moments. I will be right back to bring Andy onto the program. You've tuned in to Wynwood Radio, and you're listening to the weekly edition, Wednesday, 5 o'clock, of Discussions of Truth. I'm your host, Ian Hamilton Trottier.
We have this energy now, and we have the perfect time to start the new year off. And I'm not talking about I'm gonna quit smoking, or I'm gonna, have, 2 shots tequila now instead of 10. I'm gonna lose weight. No, this is deep change. This is not about resolutions. This is about how you want your life to be. These are the times we're going into. It's no more messing around, It's no more being complacent. You can be there, and that's fine, but it's not going to really get you too far. And I don't care if you have everything, all the toys and everything you want in the world. It's not going to get you too far. We're talking about serenity, peace, love. So what relationship do you have to let go of? Who do you need to forgive? What resentments are you hanging on to? Resentments drag you by the ass, and they don't let go. They don't let go until you consciously say, and you make that choice, I'm not going to hold this anymore. It's the poison. The fingers you're pointing, it's like the poison going down your throat. It is. So we have this opportunity, and I tell you, it's been the last couple of months of a lot of serious changes have been happening, and they forced me to look deeper and look and see where my resistance comes from. What old ideas am I still hanging on to? What illusions am I still holding on to? And, for me, being in the field that I am, I read a lot, I work a lot. Mostly every person that comes to me is a mirror. And I can, I can identify with them. I've been there, or I feel that way, or I felt that way before. It's nothing out there new. We all go through these things, recycled, and all I know is that I have to be better, and it's a kick in the ass. And part of doing this work and working as a spiritual healer is I have to be on it with myself. I don't want to be a hypocrite, I don't want to teach someone. I don't want to give back something that I don't have. I don't want to say, oh, you should be like this, but then I'm like shivering in the corner. So it's beautiful. It keeps me on my toes. So all this change is happening. I had a lot of resentments coming up. A lot of anger, holding on to things that I know I need to let go of. When you need to let go of it, but you don't want to, for whatever reason, the devil, whatever. It was more comfortable. Well, I don't know what's out there. If I let go of this, what's going to happen? It's that stepping out on faith. So I've been stepping out on faith. I have to. And so how do I get through these moments? Okay, you feel the change. Things are happening. Some days you're overwhelmed. Some days you can deal with it. This is where we can use tools, spiritual tools, meditation. Hey, I'm not the biggest meditator out there. Sometimes I can do about 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Sometimes I can do more. Sometimes I set a timer on my phone, do 10 minutes. Sometimes I listen to a guided meditation before I go to sleep. I'm not do it the same way every day. Sometimes my meditation is let me sweep the floor in my house. Maybe it's when I'm in the car, I'm driving, but I'm not going to.
All right, a little little jump in the fire there. Kill 'em all, Metallica. We open with Seek and Destroy because that is exactly what we aim to do on this program, is seek out corruption and completely obliterate it, destroy it. We are joined by an incredible researcher based in the UK, Mr. AndyThomas. Andy, are you there? Okay, 1 minute. Yeah, I thought I had, okay. Andy, let's try that again. Are you there?
I am here. Hello.
Welcome to Discussions of Truth, Mr. Thomas. And we appreciate you staying up for the later hour there. Is it a 4-hour time difference?
I think it might even be 5. That's not too bad. Yeah, I'm here and I'm awake.
Fantastic. Now, Andy, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're considered one of UK's leading alternative researchers, and you present at a conference called the Glastonbury Symposium.
That's right. I mean, that's an event that I've been helping to run for many years now. It's been running for 29 years. So it's actually Britain's longest alternative event, if you want to call it that, of its kind. So that's just one of the many things that I do. I'm one of the organisers, one of the presenters, and we try to get together a lot of speakers from anywhere we can find them who've got something interesting to say that you're not going to hear in the mainstream media. So, like you, we're trying to give voices to people that simply don't get heard enough. But in the meantime, I'm always going around lecturing, written a number of books about this, just trying to get word out there that, we need to get the bigger picture, which sadly the mainstream doesn't want us to see, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, so let's hit on a little bit of that. I think for Americans, there's people that kind of get deep. We had a guy named Eric Karlstrom on the program a few weeks ago, and he's kind of been fighting the main establishment in the United States going back to Vietnam. So there's been that type of friction, but it hasn't really surfaced to being kind of a main hashtag, if you will, I think, until Trump kind of made this whole fake news deep state thing quite impressed on the forefront of most Americans. But yet in the UK, tell us a little bit about the history there. What is it with, for you, you've been on BBC News, you've been on ABC 2020, History Channel, National Geographic, Sky TV, you've even made appearance on Nippon TV in Japan. So from a UK perspective, and that's kind of what I try to do, is inform listeners to get them looking at this whole kind of more of a global connection here. What is it with in Britain? Give us an example of kind of the fight that you do on a regular basis, and the alternative. Why in that regard? Why do you do what you do?
Sure. I mean, certainly we don't have the same level of different stations that you've got there. Like, you've got a lot of truth stations across the States, which is brilliant. I mean, they're here, we have them, but they're not as prominent over here. What people tend to do here is rely on the kind of the very mainstream things like the BBC. And the BBC, bless its heart, has very much taken a downturn, I think, especially over the last 10 years. And now it seems to exist purely to kind of push a sort of progressive liberal agenda, but it doesn't want to hear anybody that edges into anything that you might say call conspiracy theory, which that is what they call it. But instead of like hearing the voices of why people are challenging the very stories they're putting out, all they do is continually denigrate them. They make fun of them. So we've got a curious thing here. The only way that we can make any kind of marked balance that out is obviously to, put the information out where we can, but it almost has to be done in a more grassroots way here. And I mean, over the years, what I've tried to do is to try to almost fly under the radar are. I mean, I began through an interest in, what some people might call the paranormal, things like UFOs, crop circles, and all of that. Now, you can think what you like about those things, but what I realized was just in those kind of areas, the mainstream didn't want to hear any other version other than it's all nonsense, it's garbage, they don't want to hear it. And I realized therefore that they are not listening to anything that is not outside a very narrow band that they've declared. So I began giving talks, and I found that I was getting invited to speak in places where they obviously didn't know what they were going to get, and I continually tried to feed them information and open doorways to other sources of information that are going to challenge what they're getting bombarded with all the time from every direction. So, that's what I'm trying to do. And my books, Conspiracies is a big book still out there, and The Truth Agenda, also they try in an accessible form to give people the big picture as to why this matters and what it is they're not hearing in the mainstream. And we take that for granted. We know we're not told the truth, but there's a lot of people out there who haven't realized that. They're still listening only to very few mainstream channels. So, they still need waking up.
Yeah, I mean, the UK, of course, is one of the main differences is in the U.S. the system was designed without a king or a queen, and of course you have the beloved Queen Elizabeth, who's very charming, but it is a very different system, and like you said, it does kind of limit and makes your news those channels more in line with, I suppose, the monarchy agenda. I'm assuming, I don't know that well, but in that sense, the U.S. is a little more free. However, I think that in 2019, America is under incredible fire, and there's a massive kind of effort to control media, and for instance, there's a graph on impeachmassmedia.com that kind of shows the major media outlets being owned by in the 1980s being owned by like 80 different companies, and today, as of the past probably 5 or 7 years, that's now down to about 6 different companies.
Yeah.
So what Americans don't realize is that and this is a global thing, right? Because we're all interconnected on this kind of economic level. But what Americans don't realize is that their kind of efforts for receiving their news and their media and the truth is becoming much, much, much more narrow. So with you, Andy, what was it? You kind of started this push from kind of the paranoia or the mystery, unexplained mystery angle. What was it that kind of caught your eye? Was it this kind of, wow, there might be UFOs, or what did I just see, or a crop circle phenomena? What was it with you that kind of had you kind of researching an alternative angle?
I mean, for me, the big turning point was when I started to get interested in crop circles. Now, I know there's a lot of people, they don't take them seriously. They believe they're all man-made. But even if that is your view,
Yeah.
One thing we can say for certain is the media does not tell the truth about them. It never has done. And when I got involved, I thought, I'm just open-minded. I don't know what's making crop circles, but I'm going to try and find out, as much as I can. And continually, I have seen right at the beginning and even to now, the media literally tell lies about the crop circles. They tell lies about the people researching them. They don't give anybody the real evidence. They give only one side of the story. And there are things which, even if you think they're all man-made, there are things they say which are simply provably untrue. So as I began to realize that was going on, even in that one little narrow field, I realized, and I began to meet other people researching other things, that of course there are so many other areas that are not being talked about, that are not being fairly reflected. Now, I mean, what you described there, we do have the same problem here. Yeah, a lot of the media companies are increasingly owned by very few people. And certainly, yeah, over here, I mean, I think our TV stations especially, they're highly sort of deferential towards the royal family. They're not going to try and rock the status quo. But what's happening here, and I think over your way too, is of course now anything which is perfectly legitimate alternative inquiry is being branded fake news.
Yeah.
Now, this is where what they're trying to do is to close it down. We've already seen around the world a lot of people being taken off social media because social media is now declaring that what they're saying is fake news. So we're winding up with all of this kind of information that we're trying to put out there. They're trying to push it into a little backwater in the hope that eventually it will be so hard to get to this kind of stuff that nobody's going to find it. And that needs to be fought. We need to create new forums, new kinds of social media, I believe, to get this stuff out there. But unfortunately, if you don't know it's there, and if you don't realize what's happening, you might genuinely believe, oh, that's all fake news. We don't need to hear about that. And that's a serious problem because stuff is vanishing out of the sight of people and they don't even know it's happening, which is a great concern.
Yeah, so secrets in plain sight. I mean, in the U.S., all an American has to do is turn over a dollar bill, and they find the phrase "Novus Ordo Seclorum," the New World Order, right? And they find an image of what seems to be an Egyptian pyramid with the kind of what's referred to as the overseeing eye. So there's those types of things that appear in. We take them for granted. We look at them all the time. Of course, purchasing and the economy is becoming more digitized, and paper currency is gradually kind of being phased out. It seems more and more with each year. But in that regard, you look at hey, what is the New World Order? So is it possible that there are kind of elite banking organizations or clubs that are conspiring to control the way that people live their life? I don't think it's that far-fetched to consider that. But quickly there's that kind of that mass media push to kind of pigeonhole the person that wants to suggest that could be happening into a conspiracy theorist. They're completely absurd. But in your research, you're talking about this effort to do that. Where is that coming from? From your research, where is that being rooted from?
I mean, the New World Order is a verifiable project. You can trace its origins back, and I mean, it's not even hidden. Like you say, the fact that it's on a banknote tells you everything. We've had many famous politicians, Obama, Tony Blair, other people like that. They've actually given speeches where they have openly declared we need
George
a
Bush.
new world order.
Yeah.
So it's
Right.
not even hidden. The idea that there are ruling elites which have huge power, I mean, it's in plain sight. It's absolutely obvious. I find it extraordinary when I hear people describing those kinds of things as conspiracy theories, because they are there. They are conspiracy facts. Everybody knows it. And yet we all, not we personally, but, collectively, we turn a blind eye. I mean, there are clearly organizations, some of them with very deep occult agendas, which are doing things which would not be seen as normal by anybody else. I mean, let's take the obvious one, a group like the Bohemian Club, which is, meets once a year in California. It has people from very high levels of office around the world, prime ministers, presidents, who go along. They witness a ceremony where people in robes worship a giant stone owl and sacrifice the effigy of a child to it. Now, if you and I did that, and the mainstream got a hold of that, I'm sure they would have something to say about it. But it's funny, isn't it? When the world leaders do it, we're not supposed to mention it. And we know it's true. People have broken in, they filmed it, authors have written about it, and yet the clever thing is what they do is they don't respond to it. And that's how they keep it out of the eye line of most everyday folks. So you can see this going on all around you. The very fact that you say, the eye of providence, as it's called, the Great Seal of America, pretty much tells it like it is. There is the eye at the top. The rest of us are somewhere buried in the pyramid below. I mean, it couldn't be more blatant. And yet still people seem not to notice. And we're encouraged not to notice. And of course, we're distracted all the time by ridiculous stuff in the media, terrible TV, terrible food. But it keeps us out of mischief just enough to stop us asking questions. So this is where, there is a necessity to wake as many people up to try and do something. Because the more people that do that, these ruling elites that that are plainly there, they're not going to be able to get away with it quite so easily. But they do, because too many people are just simply not aware of what is going on around them.
So I'm sure you're familiar with Operation Northwoods, and from a British point of view, from where you're viewing things, in your opinion, in your view, what happened on 9/11?
I mean, to me, whichever way you want to look at it, one thing is very clear. The official story is not true. I mean, you can demonstrate this by just looking at the contradictions which are inherent in the official record. You don't even need to have a conspiracy theory. You can just see that it doesn't make sense. Now, I mean, there's a lot of great work out there. I think the work of people like David Ray Griffin has absolutely pointed out without any question that, some extra element helped or caused that to occur, which was not just bin Laden sitting in a cave in Afghanistan. There's too many things that make no sense. The laws of physics are contravened. You can write a whole long list and see what stacks up. How many anomalies are there around 9/11? Now, you always get a few anomalies in any news story, but when they start to stack up as much as they do on 9/11, you realize whichever way you look at it, the public's been lied to. So in my view, and I've written about this extensively in my books, you can demonstrate categorically that somebody somewhere within American command and control, and some people name the names and some of them seem fairly obvious, must have been involved. And I think the fact that the world still has 50% of it not believing that is incredible. But on the other hand, the fact that I think one of the polls showed a few years ago around 50% of the world doesn't believe the official story, at the same time that offers hope, but it's still not enough. Anybody who spends even 5 minutes researching this should be able to very quickly realize that they've been lied to. I mean, if not, you're either working for some of these people involved in it or you are being very delusional. To me, the evidence is absolutely clear that what we have been told is not true.
Yeah, it seems pretty apparent that if you take the road of it being a false flag, which means creating an enemy for purpose of creating a war, weapons of mass destruction, none were found, and then you got half your army in Afghanistan and in Iraq and sprawled over the Middle East and part of Western Asia. So that type of angle and that type of thinking is very easily explained. What can you tell us, Andy, about the City of London? That would be the banking center of London.
Sure. Well, I mean, if you drive around London, it's very interesting because what you realize is that, again, the signs and the symbols of the elite, I mean, they're everywhere.
Interesting.
I mean, there are modern buildings like Canary Wharf Tower, which is right at the heart of our financial center, for instance, which has a great big glass pyramid on the top, I mean, which is making itself pretty obvious there. So they like pyramids. There's a lot of Masonic symbolism built into various structures in London, so it's all kind of there to see once you recognize it. People just don't notice, though. But I mean, the City of London, I mean, it's a fascinating thing because it is an entity in its own right, and people don't realize this. You've got London, but then you have the City of London, which is like this kind of square mile thing right in the middle, which has completely its own laws. It has its own Lord Mayor, which is different to the Mayor of London itself. It has its own rules. It is effectively untouchable. And clearly massive decisions, especially about the economy, are made from there, and they are a law unto themselves. Now, I'm not saying that is only just true in London. I think each of the Western countries especially has similar phenomena in different cities. But again, what you've got elites within elites. And it's kind of obvious, really, once you start to look at the way it all works. And that's the thing. I mean, all the time, the people at the tops of the big glass towers in the world of banking and finance and wherever, all the time they have the means, they have the money to put the world right. but they choose not to and serve only themselves, well, funnily enough, they're going to get conspiracy theories. And until that is changed, I'm afraid there's always going to be this standoff between us and them. It is sadly endemic in our system.
Andy, who controls the City of London?
Well, I mean, there again, I mean, this comes down to whether you want to see it as, some people use the catch-all term, the Illuminati. The Illuminati was a real order. I mean, that was founded in Bavaria in 1776, funnily enough, same year that America went independent.
Right.
They didn't last long. They were disbanded within about 10 years, but it was an attempt to rule from the shadows. But, many people think that at the very least those ideals were then seeded around the world, but especially in America and Britain. So, you could just say, well, there is clearly one ruling elite. I think personally it's a little bit more complex than that. I think there are factions. I think there are, elites within elites, but you've only got to look at the roll call of the people who are attending meetings of things like the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, the Council for Foreign Relations, and you'll see that actually we don't know what these people decide. We're not allowed as members of the public to hear what they discuss, and yet clearly these unelected groups and strange quangos have enormous influence over parliaments around the world. And the people that go, they're quite leading politicians, not always the obvious ones, but they're usually people with a lot of money, a lot of power, a lot of influence. You can read about them. We know who they are. And yet it's funny when they are challenged to say, well, what were you doing at these meetings? They always try to brush it off as a simple business meeting, nothing to worry about. And yet clearly these groups have great power. So I think you can join the dots fairly obviously and see where it all meets up. And the kind of people you think it might be, well, it generally is, with names perhaps behind them that you don't hear about so much. But certainly, if you go back to something like 9/11, many people believe Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld at the very least knew what was really going on because of the various anomalies in the testimony they've given. You can look around the world and see all the different people that attend these meetings, and you think, well, why isn't this really obvious? But it's not obvious because the mainstream won't report it. Every now and then you might get a newspaper that will try to expose it. Over here, we've got a paper called The Guardian, and that has run a few articles about the Bilderbergs, for instance. But that's about it. And it gets ignored, and things move on, and that's how they get away with it.
Now, on the cover of your book, The Truth Agenda, Making Sense of Unexplained Mysteries, you've got a picture of the moonwalking. In your research, what happened there?
This is something that I use as a kind of an opportunity, if you like, to demonstrate the grey areas that come up from conspiracy theories. Because, I should stress here, when I was young, I was very excited by the Apollo missions. I thought it was fantastic. I've got James Irwin's autograph somewhere, one of the astronauts. So this was a big deal for me.
Yeah.
It's such a kind of a massive achievement of mankind. If you can demonstrate that the whole story has not been told about it, that is very useful to some people to make them realize, well, hang on a minute. Well, in that case, maybe we haven't been told the truth about lots of things. And what you can say about the moon landings is whether we did or didn't go, I cannot say for sure, but you can certainly say some of that evidence is not reliable. There are many anomalies. You've got contradictions between different images. You've got contradictions in the astronaut's testimony. You've got many photographs that if they are taken on the moon, it appears not to make any sense. The lighting is wrong. Got issues with the shadows and so on. Now, all of this is ridiculed, of course, by people in authority, by NASA, and people that are very defensive of the moon landings, which I understand because it was such a big deal and nobody wants to hear that kind of taken apart. But
right.
I think you can certainly show that some of those images are not on the moon. And the problem is, if some of them are not on the moon, well, then how do you know that any of them are? So you wind up with a grey area. So in the truth agenda, there's a chapter about the moon landings. I use that to make the point that it's not reliable. I don't say whether we did go or didn't go. I don't know. Part of me hopes we did, but there are so many issues around it. It's one of those stories we all take for granted. We're fed one version of the story, a bit like 9/11, and you absorb it and you just assume that because so many people say it's true, well, it must have been true. But then you look at the evidence and you say, well, maybe not. And there's a great quote from the great Thomas Paine, who, who was very influential in getting you people to fight us in the 1700s. And he once said, the long act of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right. And there's a great truth in that. We get used to things. We don't question them. But then if somebody points out just a few anomalies, you wake up. You go, hang on a minute. This doesn't make sense. And certainly the moon landing evidence is one of those areas. It's hard to come to an absolute conclusion, but we've not been told the true story or not the whole story. And so, of course, that then leads you to question many other things. And so I use that as an example that it's not clear cut. It's not necessarily one thing or the other, but you have to relook at this evidence.
And that's the beauty of it all, right? Is that we have that ability, and we fight to maintain, to keep that ability to question these types of things. There's nothing wrong with questioning it, and certainly one of the most prolific athletes in the U.S., Steph Curry, recently came out and questioned whether that was legitimate or not, and he kind of backtracked on it, and NASA quickly shot back and said, "Oh, well, we'll invite you down to Houston. You can tour our museum. You can tour our facility." But that's the kind of the Robin Hood angle of, hey, we should have the ability to maintain and not be attacked, to question whether these things happen. When you go right now to these types of conferences and symposiums, i.e. the Glastonbury Symposium, Andy, what's typically the main or the biggest topic that people want to know about or want to talk about?
I think that there's certainly a lot of concern at the moment about just the fact that we are not ever told the truth about anything. I mean, particularly here in Britain at the moment. Okay, so we've got the big Brexit debate going on, and if anybody out there still doesn't know what it's about, the people voted to break away from Europe. They said we want to control ourselves here. Now, you can think that's right, you can think it's wrong, but more than 50% of the British people voted for that. So you would imagine, therefore, that would be acted on. Well, here we are, over 2 years later. They are not acting on that very clearly. They're fighting amongst themselves. No one party seems to have the nation's interests at heart. They're fighting really to keep themselves in power. And a lot of people are feeling very betrayed here. So there is a feeling that, okay, how can we live better? How can we be different? And I mean, the kind of conferences like the Glastonbury Symposium, it doesn't just stand there and point the finger at all the things that are wrong. We invite speakers along who've got ideas about how it could be put right and how we can set an example. Because if you can go from the bottom up and start to change things at a grassroots level, eventually, and it might be a long way away, something has to change at the top. All the time, these people can tell us lies. They can clearly feed us with drugs and pharmaceuticals and all of that, which are really not very good for us in large doses, and yet we're constantly told we need them, and so on and so on. There will be change. There will come a time, I think, where if enough people can say, hang on a minute, there is another option here. There are alternatives. Let's talk about them. And that's what we try to do at Glastonbury. You hope that somewhere with enough people doing this, it will begin to infiltrate wider society. But at the moment, there's a battle. So people want the truth. And, you know, our primary focus is to try to give platforms to people that are challenging what we're being fed all the time. And, you know, once you wake up to it, it's obvious that we're just constantly being misled by the powers that be.
Right.
But, you know, as we said at the beginning of this, I know that you and I, we imagine that from the start. There's still so many people that don't know that. But if they come along, they get curious and they hear even just a few speakers, they soon realize that, you know, there's a whole world out there, and we must question. We must hold those people in power to account, and we must change. The whole way the system runs has got to change.
Andy, in your efforts since you've been doing what you've been doing, and that is to dig, to find the truths in various world issues, what has been the most astonishing discovery for you?
I think for me, well, I mean, it depends what you mean by discovery, but I think the thing that's astonished me the most, which gives me great hope, is that when I talk about these kinds of subjects to perfectly mainstream audiences, and I'm very lucky, I've found myself a platform where I can do that. What I am continually amazed by is that actually everyday people, when you actually just show them a little bit of information that challenges what they've got used to hearing, they will wake up very quickly. There is a perception in the kind of truth-seeking conspiracy world that, everybody out there, the sheep. Now, you always hear that, sheeple. So it's a slightly worrying term because that presumes people can't wake up very quickly. But what I find is actually it doesn't take much just to show people a glimpse of other realities for them to come up to you at the end of a talk and say, my God, now you say, I never really believed what I was being told. Then they start coming out with stuff that they long thought, but they didn't think they could get away with saying. And when they see somebody else standing up there, actually opening the door to it and saying, well, actually, I do question what we're being told. It's remarkable just how quickly people will wake up, that they will come to their senses. And it's almost like you get used to just going along with the everyday mainstream propaganda, but it doesn't take much to wake them up out of it. And that's where the hope lies, because people are not so asleep that they can't see what's going on. I think more often than not, it's just that they're not encouraged to follow those thoughts up, and they're heavily in debt, they haven't got the time, they're too distracted. But if you can shake all of that off and say, actually, I'm going to do one thing, whatever it is, I'm going to focus on this issue and make a little bit of difference here. The more people that do that, the more something will give. So, actually, the most amazing thing of all is that at heart, I would say the vast majority of people are conspiracy theorists, if we must call them that. And it doesn't take much to get them into that place. But of course, that's another reason why the authorities have got to brand conspiracy thinking dangerous, psychologically damaged, all the things we constantly hear, because they're afraid. And I think they know that at the end of the day, the average people in the population would turn against them tomorrow if they felt it stood a chance of making a difference. So they're trying to keep people in a sleep state rather than wake them up. But I don't think it will always be that way. I certainly hope not.
Exactly. Well said, Andy. What's next for AndyThomas, and what's the next challenge for you, Andy?
I mean, it's a kind of an ongoing thing, really. I mean, at the moment, I'm working on a new version of my book, Conspiracies. I mean, that originally came out in 2013. Well, the world's moved on a lot since then, so I'm going to cover some stuff in a new version of the book that will be out in the States and in England and beyond, hopefully early next year. So I'm working on that, trying to see what are the key issues of now. For me, it's constantly trying to get the word out there ever more widely, trying to get more people to come to the conferences. And I mean, there are some groups across Britain now which are trying to get younger people involved in all kinds of stuff. And I've been giving my Conspiracies talk, which is like really the history of conspiracies, not loading the dice, but showing people that there are grounds to question the official story of things. I've had a lot of young audiences coming out, which is fantastic, because often you hear it said, young people, they're not interested in this, they only want to play on their iPhones. Well, I'm not finding that that's true. Actually, you give them the opportunity. They're not all drones. They're not all entirely brainwashed. There is a spirit of inquiry there, which is fantastic. So I'm going to be doing a lot more of that. I've been touring British cities just over the last year or so. I'm going to be doing a lot more of that, just trying to get word out there and get people to, tap into the power of inquiry themselves and think for themselves. And I think if anybody can do that and encourage people to get themselves into a new state of being, where actually they are much more independent-minded, then you've done them a great service. And it's not all fake news, and we need to break this misuse of the whole anti-fake news thing. We need to break that now, because certainly freedom of speech is being taken away by the day, certainly here, and that is something we must reverse. So anybody that can do anything, I will try to encourage them. So it's really plowing on, really, with that agenda, the truth agenda, as my book calls it.
Yeah, the censorship is a very real threat to justice and liberty globally. Andy, thank you for joining Discussions of Truth. Some final thoughts, a final nugget for listeners to walk away with.
Well, I mean, I would say that if anything concerns you, like any of the areas we've talked about here or areas that you yourself are concerned about, don't just do nothing, do something. Now, you can't all change the world. I mean, one person cannot take everything on. It's too much. You go mad. But if each one person says, I'm going to focus on this issue, I feel strongly about this issue, and I am going to do one thing, even just one thing to make a difference and get the word out there and try and shift it. If everybody does that, the dominoes, they start to tilt, and it makes a difference. And then you get waves, you get patterns, people begin to spread this stuff. But if you say, well, I can't make a difference, so I won't even bother,
right,
you're part of the problem.
Right.
So don't do that. And so my nugget is, if you can do something, do it. Even if it's a tiny little thing, even if it's just trying to campaign to save your local bus shelter or trying to stop a new wireless mast going up near you, whatever it is you're worried about, do something. Don't just stand there and complain. Get up, make a difference. And if everybody does that somewhere down the line, I think there'll be a much wider shift. So, do something. There we are. That's my nugget.
AndyThomas, ladies and gentlemen, The Truth Agenda. Andy, have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks very much.
The Truth Agenda. Andy is clearly taking mass media as he knows it, and as a British citizen, to task. And there's everything right about doing that, because he's fighting for, whether you agree with him or not, the fact that he's fighting and questioning the mainstream message helps keep you free and helps keep you with a more balanced and equal life, whether you realize it or not. So, as all the guests, I applaud that come onto this program. I applaud them for what they do. I will be right back with some closing thoughts. Jump in the fire. No, I was in No Remorse. Metallica. They organized in Los Angeles, but wrote most of the majority of their songs in San Francisco, where I hail from, the San Francisco Bay Area. And for the past few years, enjoying the wonderful sun of South Florida. Unexpected. I never saw myself doing this, ever. Never, ever, ever did I see myself doing what I'm doing, essentially questioning authority. I never saw myself doing that. Happy-go-lucky, let live and let be, if you will, completely confiding in the powers that be. Oh, and then came along a little virus called the Zika virus and a pesticide. But it really wasn't that. Name nail it. It really wasn't that. It was actually a very, very good friend of mine that very strongly urged me to go to the town hall meeting to listen to both sides of the debate. And that sparked... It sparked, I'm going to assume, a very similar fire to what lights Andy's research and motive. And that is, once something like that happens, maybe you lose a loved one that, for instance, was in one of the trade towers. Yes, 3,000 people lost their lives. Absolutely. Or you lose a son, or a best friend, or whoever it may be, the daughter that's gone to war in Iraq. When it hits home, like having your airspace invaded with a gas against your will, then you get a different perspective. And I'm speaking from experience, of course. Next week, Richard Lighthouse, he's an American author and researcher, will join us again. He's got a mechanical engineering degree from Stanford University. He talked about Lloyd's Bank of London, okay? He says it's the largest banking organization on the planet. He says it's larger than all other banking organizations that compete with it. Lighthouse states that he's currently an executive in an energy company based in Texas, and that his primary message is of an important scientific discovery. Quote, our universe literally blinks off. So this is a very smart individual person. I'll continue reading. I know I cut that off. Our universe literally blinks off and on more than 1 trillion cycles each second, 1.1 THz. The harmonics of this frequency can be used for time travel, he says, faster than light travel, travel between parallel universes, and instant radio communication between galaxies. Okay? Look, that makes me think of one of the early guests on this program, David Sereda. And he spoke about the pyramids, and there's not just one. There's various pyramids that dot the globe, i.e. Chichen Itza, Teotihuacan. Those are both located in Mexico. There's pyramids the Chinese government are just hiding from public view. Yes. What is it called? The White Pyramid? Very close to where the terracotta warriors are. In Xi'an? Is it Xi'an? Xi'an, China? Yes, pyramids. He says pyramids, David Sereda, he says pyramids are used as they're a crystal oscillator used to travel. Okay? Not a single one of us as a human being, not a single one of us can define and give without theorizing. None of us can say where this universe was created. None of us. Okay? Religion is religion. It has its own place. But nobody knows where this species came from. Not a single one of us can explain that. The origin of the universe or the planet Earth, be it that. Okay? So being unable, being censored, is, in my opinion, against an inalienable right. It should be your right to be able to question authority, because who makes any other member of this race, the human race of the species, to tell you that you can't live a life the way you want to live a life, and that if you're providing service that helps somebody else, you're peaceful, there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. And truth should be questioned, or the narrative that may be masking the truth should be questioned at all times, under all circumstances. And that's my final message for today. I'll be right back with you next week, 7 days from now, Wednesday, 5 p.m. Tune in to me every Wednesday, 5 p.m. Donate $50 to the program. Get a T-shirt, impeachmassmedia.com. and or stopmassmedia.com. They both link to the same page. I've been your host for Discussions of Truth, Ian Hamilton Trottier. I'll be with Richard Lighthouse next week. And remember, Dennis Bushnell, chief scientist of NASA Langley, will join us and talk about climate change, a very real threat, starting out the month of April. And until then, be awesome.